Mr. William F. Vendley, please proceed to the podium.
Very warm greetings to all here. It's truly my joy to participate in this extremely important symposium on this very important day. Mr. Johan Sanz, we appreciate you particularly in the work that you're leading with UNHCR here. Madam Ogata, your presence means so much to all of us. Some of what I'm going to mention can be traced back to your own remarkable contributions. And Representative Aisawa, we thank you for the leadership on refugees, and I particularly thank you in the name of all of the religious communities in South Thailand that you have been a principal to help the Japanese government recognize that religious communities can work together without promoting their particular sectarian belief agenda narrowly, but work together. And so I think this is pioneering leadership that you've been exercising for us. This afternoon, I would like to begin by reflecting on a kind of revolution that is taking place among the religious communities. It's a revolution of learning how to become religiously bilingual. That's an odd term, and I'm going to try to share what that means. And I'd like to point out that it was events here in Japan that helped to animate this revolution of religious bilingualism and to unleash its practical, action-oriented significance around the world. Second, I want to focus on the language we use for refugees and asylum seekers. Now, clearly, the legal distinctions that are essential for UNHCR's own mission have enduring importance, very, very central importance. I want to suggest that two notions championed by the religious communities can have great significance, and these notions are human dignity, you mentioned it in your own remark, and shared security, a notion that, Madam Ogata, your own work really provided stimulus to the religious communities for. Third, I want to make just brief reflections with you on the procedure, the method that can be useful in mobilizing the very specific assets that the religious communities have in relationship to the challenges that refugees and asylum seekers and the communities trying to receive them all experience. First, these comments on religious bilingualism. Now, this can sound rather abstract and seemingly not so directly related to the concrete challenges, but in my experience around the world, it's enormously important. Just 43 years ago, some 250 senior religious leaders from all major religions and coming from all continents boarded planes to come here to Japan. The planes took off. They were aiming for Kyoto, but in a very genuine sense, they were moving into the future. The British historian Arnold Toynbee observed the meeting that took place in Kyoto in 1970 as an historic event. The first time in recorded history, the world's diverse religious leaders gathered themselves around the fundamental challenges of peace. They didn't gather to debate or defend their differing doctrines. Those, for them, still valid concerns were for other forums. Rather, they gathered as allies to face together the forces that were menacing the entire human family. Would the world annihilate itself in a nuclear war? That was the crisis of that hour. It was in response to that crisis that WCRP was born here in Japan in 1970. That meeting, 43 years ago, has proved to have enduring value. Beyond the urgent, specific topic it addressed, and beyond the projects it initiated, including one focused on refugees from Vietnam, that meeting helped to foster a fundamental shift in the consciousness of the world's religious communities. That shift in awareness is the recognition that today religious communities need to be bilingual, and that being bilingual is the key to effective multi-religious and even multi-stakeholder collaboration that involves religious communities. Now, clearly the first language that each religious community has is its own primary language. It's the language Buddhists have to talk about Buddhism with Buddhists, or that Christians have to talk among Christians about Christianity, or Islam to talk about Islam, or Shinto to talk about Shintoism. But the second language that I'm referring to, I like to call a kind of shared public language. And I don't use the word secular for public because secular has historically been too freighted with anti-religious elements. Instead, I think today the religious communities need to continue speaking their own primary religious language among their own believers, but since not all are believers of any one religion, they also need to be able to speak in a public idiom. Today, religious leaders are indeed learning how to speak both of those languages. Those 250 religious leaders who boarded planes to come here to Japan 43 years ago not only became religiously bilingual, meaning they put issues of common concern squarely before them, but they began to institutionalize the need for religions to be able to speak two languages. They began to build multi-religious mechanisms that could facilitate collaboration in that second public language, the language of shared care, a common moral language, a language of common commitment to action. And so I dwell on that. It is really a revolution that's taking place all around the world among the religious communities, because it's key if we are indeed going to engage the religious communities as fundamental partners in the collaborative work that UNHCR is calling all of us to join into. The second point that I would like to share is what I would call a multi-religious horizon. By horizon, I mean a framework for how we would understand refugees, asylum seekers, all the categories of concerned populations of UNHCR. My commitment here is that the way we frame things, the way we frame issues, the breadth or narrowness of our notions sets the horizon of our care, determines the shape of our caring. So I want to ask, what basic contribution can religious communities make to the language of refugees and asylum seekers? What would the religious communities bring to the discussion that has to be the public discussion for all of us? To be faithful to the shift in consciousness I described in the first point, we would recognize that each religious community needs to examine this question of refugees in its own religious language. So Buddhists need to analyze it as Buddhists, or Christians as Christians, Muslims as Muslims, and so on. But beyond that, how could the religious communities contribute to multi-religious notions that are public, that we can bring to the table, that we can join with UNHCR to help frame the challenges of refugees. There are two notions that I believe can have a decisive importance for us. They are human dignity, number one, and secondly, shared security, number two. I want to hasten to say that not only religious communities can contribute to these notions, people of goodwill of all kinds of persuasions can contribute to them, but I think it is also fair to say that these notions, and I'll describe them, are very deeply congenial to the historic concerns of the religious communities. The importance of these two basic notions, human dignity and shared security, comes into focus when we pay attention to the categories of immigrants. Terms like refugee, migrant, forced migrant, immigrant, undocumented, internally displaced person, and alien are some of the most common terms one finds in the literature. Linking these terms with relevant legal codes is extremely important, so I want to note my appreciation for the value of this specialized vocabulary related to diverse populations in migration, especially a term like refugee that is defined clearly in the 1951 United Nations Convention relating to the status of refugees. Nevertheless, and having expressed a genuine recognition of the need for these kinds of terms, nevertheless, these specialized terms are inherently limited. They are simply not adequate to the human reality of the people being categorized. They all too often place the people being categorized in unequal relations with those who are receiving them. They leave unexpressed, critically important dimensions of human existence. So to complement these specialized terms, not replace them, let's think of the notion human dignity. It's a basic notion that the world's religious communities are turning to when they together are speaking that second public language. It's a term they're using when they try to speak about the ultimate worth of human existence. These multi-religious groups recognize that each diverse tradition has its own way of anchoring human dignity in that tradition's experience of the sacred. This dignity is inalienable. You cannot be separated from it. It's not given by religions, it's not given by cultures, by states, societies, communities, or individuals. So it cannot be taken away by any of them. Moreover, religious groups recognize that this dignity must be restored, must be addressed whenever it is violated. In short, knowing that a person is a refugee, a migrant, a forced migrant, an immigrant, and so on, is a terribly important detail. And we need these detailed categories to grasp these situations. But a person's most basic identity is their inalienable dignity. Human dignity is even more basic, I would submit, than human rights. Rights flow from human dignity. Being legal or illegal does not change one's human dignity. Being legal or illegal does change legal obligations, but it does not alter are religiously rooted, at least for the religious communities, obligations to honor, protect, and restore the dignity of others. When it comes to human dignity, there is no in-group and no out-group. All are equal due to a status that none earned, but which all are called to receive and to respect. Placing human dignity and the obligation to restore it when it has been violated at the center of the debate on refugees, I think will add to the important categories that UNHCR understandably has to deal so centrally with. Very quickly, I move to a second notion. Madam Ogata, here is where the religious communities have been deeply inspired by your work on human security. They have begun to forge for themselves a notion that builds out of human security of shared security. And it focuses on our fundamental vulnerability as human beings. We're all mortal. We're all going to die. And it questions all of us as to how we are going to manage our fundamental vulnerability. Will we use it to illegitimately try to secure ourselves at the expense of others, or does our vulnerability, if lived openly and honestly, invite us into an appreciation and understanding and a compassion of those who are also vulnerable? So this term of shared security, dealing with our vulnerability, also dealing with our interrelatedness, that in fact your security and my security are profoundly interrelated. There simply aren't walls today high enough to insulate ourselves from the least secure among us, and that indeed we are called by a notion such as shared security into a profound recognition that the well-being of the refugee is in fact deeply linked to our own personal well-being. Finally, I'd like to make just a few comments about how I think the religious communities can go about more methodically capturing their own capacities for action. It begins very much like this symposium. We start by putting the challenges that refugees are facing right at the center of the table. We turn to UNHCR to help us to analyze those challenges. And all of us further refine them, add texture to the challenges that refugees are facing. That's number one. But once we've done that, we've got to drive those challenges and express those challenges as fundamental roles. What has to be done? And once we have roles, we've taken challenges and translated them into roles, the religious communities can use those roles as a kind of lens to go back and re-inventory themselves. What do the religious communities have that could contribute to addressing those very specific roles? If you're a Buddhist, what does the imperative to act like a bodhisattva do in terms of a training? How would that help equip one to deal with the human realities of refugees? If you have an ethics of unrestricted compassion, how does that relate? How is that a resource to deal with building a culture that could welcome refugees? And as was already noted, if you have a panoply of local religious temples, how could they be an asset to assist to assist the refugee populations? Finally, we've got to know how to, if we can identify assets, we've got to know how to mobilize them. And here, nothing works like working, and that is to be gathered and to recognize very specific projects that all of us would commit ourselves to. Does this work? My very simple answer is that it does work. I have observed it all over the world, that enormously challenging problems from conflict to big disease pandemics like AIDS are when they're approached in this way, the religious communities discover enormous assets that they can bring to the table. That's surely the case in the situation of refugees. I conclude, and I simply mention with enormous personal gratitude, Japan has played an irreplaceable role in helping to advance the religious bilingualism that is essential for multi-religious cooperation. Second, Japan has helped us to develop the multi-religious categories of human dignity and shared security. And finally, Japan, particularly through WCRP in Japan, has helped to pioneer around the world the simple but creative method for multi-religious action that I've just noted. Using this legacy here in Japan to tackle immigration issues will surely honor the human dignity and shared security of those who were born here, as well as those fortunate enough to find their way here. For your kind attention and patience with me, I want to thank you very much.